name is Dr. Scott Smith, and I will be talking with you about evolution's fatal flaw, how naturalistic science digs its own grave. First, I'd like to talk a little bit about Scripture and its account of creation. God brought creation into existence from nothing, and we can see that from Genesis 1:1, that he supernaturally brought everything that has come into existence. Notice that in Genesis 1:24-25, he speaks about the animals or fish, the birds. All these reproduce according to their own kind, it says. So what kind of thing are humans? Well, there's something unique about them, Scripture says. From Genesis 1:26, it speaks about how we are made in God's very image. And I think that is something fundamentally rooted in our souls. God, essential to his image is not that he has a body. He's made us to have that way. So to be made in God's image is something I think is fundamentally rooted in our souls, the immaterial aspect and essential nature of us. So we too reproduce after our own kind. Now a little more about this idea of kinds. An essence or essential nature would be what kind of thing something is, the whatness, you might say, of something. An essence defines something as the kind of thing it is. And to talk about an essential nature, it's the set of certain properties that are essential or necessary or intrinsic, you might even say, to something, that without them, that thing ceases to exist. So for example, we could speak about the essence of an acorn. Is its oakness. An acorn is an oak seed. It's not a seed that makes some other kind of tree, like a eucalyptus tree or a birch tree. The essential nature of humans, I think, is their soul, and I think biblically that's what the authors have in mind. Now, essences are the kinds of things that two things of the same kind can share in common. So, for example, why are we all humans? Because we all literally share a common human nature or human essence. So again, like I mentioned before, essences are the sort of thing that are not physical. A little more on essences. They also define the limits of kinds of changes that something can undergo and still be the same thing. So that is why, for example, dogs don't give birth to cats, or we don't see dogs mutate and become some other kind of species. Biblically, rather, like begets like. And this is in stark contrast with Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection. On his kind of view, macroevolution holds that over time, one species can mutate and change into a whole different species. There are no essences or kinds on this kind of view. This is an atheistic kind of view, or naturalistic, we might say. So if we take that view on its own criteria, is it true? Here's a picture of the evolutionary tree, the kind of classification system, based upon Darwin's theory, where everything that's now exists, seen at the top level here, has evolved eventually from a common ancestor. Now, on Darwin's kind of view, on this evolutionary naturalistic kind of view, what is real? Well, there's only the so-called natural. There's nothing supernatural. Another way to put it is that there's only the material and physical stuff is real. Now, that might include some non-physical things, but what they are depend for their existence on the physical. So all that exists is sense perceptible, at least in principle, even if it's something we can't see yet. Maybe we need to develop our technology more, and then we'll be able to see things, with our eyes, or detect them with our ears or something like that. But in principle, all these things are sense perceptible. Now, what's not real on this view? Well, anything that would be non-physical or immaterial. So this view excludes God, angels or demons, or any sort of essences or essential natures, like souls. Anything else that would be non-physical. For example, things that typically have been thought to be that, like thoughts or beliefs, maybe experiences, things that have typically been called mental states. Now, the dominant paradigm today in academic circles and the natural sciences especially is naturalism. And that is a philosophical view about about the nature of what's real. And that is only the natural or physical is real. And evolution by natural selection is taught as fact, in so many places. So on this view, religious views are merely opinions. They can't give us the truth about origins or what's real. Now, before we go on, let me just give a couple preliminary things for us to keep in mind. And before we look at a key evolutionist, what sort of thing would essences be if they are real? And what sort of thing would mental states or those properties of minds, like thoughts and beliefs, what kind of thing would they be? Well, on these mental states, things like thoughts and beliefs, experiences, those are some examples, but they seem to have a key thing in common, and that is something I call intentionality. Now, that's a big English term. It simply means that our thoughts or beliefs or experiences we use to make observations, they have a feature in common, and they are of or about things. A thought right now that I have about my wife as she goes to a lunch meeting, or a thought about this presentation, or a belief about what I ate for dinner last night. Now, can you ever have a thought that isn't about anything? I don't think so. Whenever we have a thought, it seems like it's always about something. So, some key features of this intentionality. It's like the directedness, so to speak, of my thoughts or experiences. But what's it made of, so to speak? If intentionality were something, that was physical or made out of matter, then it seems that for my thought to be about some object, let's say, then that something would have to cause my thought to be in a physical, causal relationship with that. So, for example, what if I'm thinking about Pegasus? Now, Pegasus is not real. There's not really a winged horse out there, although I have a little mini statue, a model of Pegasus in my office. But let's think about now, what if that intentionality or that aboutness of my thought, if it were physical, then my thought and Pegasus would stand in some sort of physical causal relation. Now these arrows here, the arrow going from Pegasus toward me in that picture is that the idea that Pegasus, this physical thing, causes in me the thought. And in turn, the arrow from me toward Pegasus indicates that my thought would be about or directed toward, you might say, Pegasus. So Pegasus, this physical thing, causes in me the thought about Pegasus. And this is all on this view that if my aboutness of my thoughts, this intentionality, were nothing but a physical thing, Pegasus in this case would cause my thought, which in turn, is about Pegasus. It's a physical causal relation. But that doesn't make sense, because Pegasus is not real. It's not a real physical horse, with wings, out there. And yet I still can think about things that do not exist, like Pegasus. So that suggests to me that intentionality is not a physical thing after all. It's something non-physical. A little bit more, and here's a picture of my wife and daughter from a few years ago. Each thought seems to have an essence. For example, I've got a thought about my family there, my wife and daughter, and myself. That thought seems to be essentially about them, about my family. That same thought could not have turned out to have been about something else, say like a cup of coffee or this talk, and still be the thought that it is. That is, it seems to have an essence to it, that thought about my family is essentially about them, and it could not have turned out to be about something else. Now, all that by way of now application to help set us up so we can look at something here regarding evolution. Daniel Dennett is a leading professor in the United States and defender of the view of evolution by natural selection. And you might have heard the term the new atheist. He is one of a group of now 3 gentlemen who make up that group. Now here's some of Dennett's basic ideas. He takes evolution by natural selection seriously in some particular ways. For him, there are no essences or souls, and there are no non-physical things like minds or thoughts or beliefs or intentionality. There's only physical stuff. That would be, things like brains that process the inputs that come from our 5 senses. So for him, natural selection is a completely blind process. There are no plans, no goals, no thoughts, no intentions, because those would involve a mind. And he, prohibits those sort of things, or thinks those things don't even exist. Now here's another key idea for Dennett. He says that the aboutness or the intentionality of our thoughts or experiences and other mental states is not real. And I think that he realizes the implication there that it can't be, if it's immaterial, it can't be real. He says instead it's just an attribution or interpretation, or you might say a conceptualization we make by adopting what he calls the intentional stance. Now that stance is just a tactic that we're going to use to predict behavior by treating something, say a person or maybe a computer, as though it has intentionality, but when it really doesn't. So here's an example from the television show Star Trek, the original series, and Mr. Spock in the foreground there is playing 3-dimensional chess with the ship's computer. And what's he doing? The idea here is for, Spock wants to get the computer's pieces, the black pieces, I think, in checkmate. But the same thing, by playing chess, we can attribute to the computer that it also is trying or intending to put Mr. Spock's pieces in checkmate. So we attribute to Spock and attribute to the computer that they both have certain goals or plans or intentions, that they are going to try to put the opponent's pieces in king in checkmate. And the way to do that will be that in response to, say, what one of them does, then there would be a belief that in order to put the opponent's king in check or in checkmate, they could move a certain piece to a certain location, believing that then the other would respond and move another piece in a certain location, and all this will lead to, they think, so to speak, that they will put their opponent in check. Now Dennett's saying there is no such real stuff going on. There is no real intentions or plans or beliefs here. We, as we observe this, are attributing to Spock or the computer that they are trying to bring these about, that they have these intentions, but that's all that's going on. We are interpreting their behavior as though that's what they're intending to do, when really that's not the case. So Dennett thinks that since these mental states like thoughts and beliefs and plans and intentions, the quality, aren't real, the qualities that they would have, like their intentionality, those aren't real. So what's really going on? They're only brain states or physical patterns and behavior that we take or interpret to be about something. We conceive it, to be that way, when it's really, not. So for Dennett, what does he say about essences? Consistent with his naturalism, he denies that there are any real essences to things. But he admits something very important that we shouldn't miss. If there were essences, he says there could be a, quote, deeper fact. That is, a fact of what's really the case, what our so-called thoughts or beliefs or plans really are about. That would be a deeper fact beyond just the mere behavior and beyond our interpretations of what Spock really is trying to do, or the computer is really planning to bring about here. But without any deeper facts, everything is just, interpretation, it seems. So here's something he realizes and even admits. Just like the French philosopher Jacques Derrida and his deconstructionist implications, Dennett holds that there is no essential meaning in a text or in behavior. There's no essential meaning of what an author had in mind when he said this or when he wrote that. Thoughts and speech are just another kind of brain activities for him. And so they are just as subject to interpretation as any other text. And for Dennett, and also for Derrida, the whole world is a text with all behavior. In other words, everything going on here with the behavior that Spock's doing and the computer are doing, it's all interpretation without any deeper fact of what's really going on or what they really intended, what they really had in mind, we might say, so to speak. It's all just interpretation that we are making here from this intentional stance tactic. Why is this the case? Again, for Dennett, there are no essences to anything, to a living organism or a human being, to a text, even to what I've written on these slides or what Dennett has written. There's no essence to a thought or a belief. There's no essence to an interpretation either, or to anything else in reality. But what he meant by that, he said, follows from that, is that there are no deeper facts to these things either. Well, there's a problem though. Knowledge also seems to be about something. If I have some knowledge, it's knowledge about my family. Or if Spock has knowledge in that case with the computer, he knows he can put the computer king in checkmate if the computer makes a move here, because Spock will then make a different move. And he knows that he will be, or it's knowledge about what will be the case. So knowledge always seems to be about something too. If we know something, we know what we're going to have for our next meal, what we're going to eat. That is always about what we're going to eat. And so if you have knowledge, it too has this quality of intentionality. But if intentionality is not real, just like Dennett said, it doesn't seem there can be any real knowledge either. Because intentionality seems to always be a necessary quality that knowledge must have. What does that mean then? What are implications of that? What about the claims that naturalists make about what's real, the real facts of the world, that everything's made out of physical stuff and matter? And Dennett, what he says, the brute facts are that everything is just physical. Or what about Dennett's claims about what's really going on? There are no real thoughts or minds or anything like that. Everything, therefore, including the theory itself of naturalistic evolution, becomes just an interpretation for Dennett and for naturalism in general, because there are no essences there are no deeper facts, therefore, about what he really had in mind, or what we might say knows, or about the truth, so to speak, of naturalism. It's just an interpretation. And that all happens because there are no essences. There are no essences that define or limit or make something what it is. Even all the things that Dennett or any other naturalist has written, there would be no essence to his, what he claimed to be the case. Without essences, everything becomes an interpretation. But he doesn't realize that it applies to his own view just as much as to anything else. So everything becomes just a way of how we conceive of or interpret reality. So on naturalism at best, everything, including that theory itself, is just an interpretation. But if everything's just an interpretation, then what is it we're interpreting? Well, I guess, whatever interpretation we're working with depends upon a prior interpretation. It's an interpretation of another interpretation. But that interpretation must be an interpretation of something else, some other interpretation. But that third interpretation must be an interpretation of some other interpretation. And what's going on here? It seems like we are left with what we might call an infinite regress of interpretations, but without any way to get started with interpreting reality itself. We are left with a never-ending series of interpretations that can never latch on to, so to speak, the real world and tell us how things really are. So, the problem with this is that naturalistic evolution is utterly self. Now, if you'd like to read an article through the internet, here's a link to it. It's one I did. It was called Evolution's Achilles Heel, ? And it was published in the Christian Research Journal. I think this link will still be active, to help you get it. You could go to equip.org and search under my name or the title, for that article. If you want to dig into this on a more academic level, I've got a book called Naturalism and Our Knowledge of Reality. It's published by Ashgate originally, and now Routledge is bought out Ashgate, so it's the publisher now. And that would be a more academic, philosophical kind of treatment, these kind of topics. I hope that helps, and I will look forward to being able to discuss this all with you. Thank you.